So now we can go back to our Angular application and start implementing the login system on the front end. Okay, so let's go back to our front end here. There we go. And let's load up the app. And one thing you will notice is that we will get this error when we go to /lists here, and that's actually because in the taskview.component.ts here, we are trying to get the tasks when there is no list ID within the root. So here we get /lists/nothing, right? So to fix that, what we can do is we can do an if statement here. So if params.listId, then we do this code here. And else this.tasks is equal to undefined. And the reason I'm doing that is because we can now go to the front end, to the template here, and we can actually put some text that shows up when there's no list selected. So if we go to tasks and then we get the task elements, okay, right, so here we can put an ngIf and say tasks. So when the tasks aren't undefined, we will now do this code. So let's just see if that works here. Okay, good. This shouldn't go on the container. This should actually, here we can create a div, and we can move all of this code here, and then we can put the ngIf here. Okay, so save that now, and let's go back to our app, and let's get rid of the ID here and just do /lists. So now we don't see the content here, and what we can do is we can now do a second div here, div, and then do an ngIf here as well, and that will be when tasks has the value of no or undefined, this code will run. So here we can now put a heading, class of title, and just put that to set that as a small title, and here we can say please select a list from the sidebar. Okay, so now let's go back to our app, and now we get this. That's not the best styling though, so let's not call it title, but let's call it empty state text. Let's call it empty state text, and let's go to the style sheet. Okay, and let's create the styles for that. So here we can put in the font size of 20 pixels, the color, which will be gray. So let's set this as 555. Okay, and let's save that, and let's go back to our app, and that looks a lot better. One thing we can also do is we can try and center this text. So text align center, and that looks pretty good. Let's actually just make this slightly lighter. So let's go and change this to maybe 888. Okay, save that. Okay, maybe 777. And there we go. Okay, so that looks pretty good now. And now we can click here and we can get the actual tasks. What we can also do is put some text here when there are no tasks. So let's do that as well. Let's do a similar thing. So here, let's just copy and paste this text here, and we can put an ngIf on this. So when tasks.length is 0, then we can say that there are no tasks here. Click the add button to create a new task. Okay, so let's go back, and there we go. We now get this text here, and we don't get it when we have tasks that are in the list. Okay, great. So that looks a lot better. Okay, cool. Let's go back to the API and see if we're still getting that error. So let's go back to the API and let's restart the server. So let's restart the server here, and let's go back to our front end, and let's try and go to /lists. Great, so we don't have that error message come up here anymore. Great, okay, so now let's move on and let's start implementing the login functionality. So let's go to /login, and we have the basic login form here. And now what we can do is we can set this up so that when we click the login button, it will actually log us in, and then it will give us access to the tasks and the lists. So now what we can do is we can make it so that when we click the login button, that it will then check our credentials, and if they're correct, then it will allow us to see our lists and our tasks. Okay, so let's go back to our front end, and let's go to the terminal and let's create a new service. So let's create a new service called AuthService. So just do that. That will create the AuthService, and that should be here. Cool. So we have the AuthService here. So the first thing we want to do is we want to inject some services. So let's get the HTTP client. Let's also get the web request service. So private web service. Okay. And then the last thing we want to inject is the router. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to create the login method. And for this we'll need an email and a password. So now we want to make a web request to the API, specifically to the login root of the API, with the email and password in the body of the web request, and ask the API whether the email and password combination match. So for this we want to go to the web request service and create a new method, and we want to call this login as well. This will take in the email and password as well, and this is where we will return the web request. So this.http.post, and use a backtick here and do this.root URL /users/login. Okay, and here we want to pass in the body, which will be the email and password, and the third argument here will be an options object, which will set the observed property to response. Okay, and that's all we have to do there. And let's put this on its new line. Okay, so that's all we have to do there. So now we can go back to the auth service, and we don't actually need this HTTP here. Okay, so here we can now do this .webservice.login, pass in the email and password. And now we can do .pipe. And here we want to pipe in a few things to this observable. And the first one is share replay. And that's something we have to import. So let's go here and let's import it. Share replay from /operators. Okay. And also we want to get tap. Okay. So let's do that as well. The reason we are using share replay here is because we don't want multiple subscribers starting multiple executions of this method. So you can read more about it on this page if you want. And it's pretty simple, it's not too complicated, but we are doing it just because we don't want to run the login method multiple times. Next we can use tap, and here we'll get the response, HTTP response of type any. So the auth tokens will be in the header of this response. We now need a way to store these headers. So we will be using local storage for that. So let's create a method here called setSession, private setSession. And here it will get the user ID, the access token, and the refresh token. And it will then use local storage to set those items. So set item, and we'll get the user ID. There we go. Okay, so that's all we have to do to store those tokens. Now here we can call that method. So set session, and we'll pass in the user ID. So we'll get the response.body.id, and we'll get the response.headers.get the X access token. And we'll do the same thing for the refresh token. Refresh token, there we go. Okay, so that's what we have to do for that bit. Okay, one thing I also want to do is create the logout method, and for that we just need to copy and paste this and change this to remove session, and we have to just remove item here. And we can get rid of these. So okay, there we go. So let's create that logout method now. Here, and then here we'll just call this .remove session. Later we will have some more code in here, so that's why I'm doing it like that. And we can actually get rid of these because we don't need them. Okay, so there we go. So that's that done for the login and logout. Let me just move this up here. Okay, so now we can actually test this out. Let me first of all just do a console log here and say logged in. And let's just console log the response. Okay, so now let's go to the login page. Let's go to here. Let's go to the login button and let's put a click event here. And here we'll call a method called onLoginButtonClick. Clicked. Let's also get the values of the email and password inputs. So let's create a template reference here for the email input. And let's do the same thing for the password input. So now we can just get those values here. So now let's go to the component class and let's create that method. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is get that service. So let's inject the service here. Okay, and here we'll do this .authService.login, and we'll pass in the email and password. There we go. And now let's see if this works. So let's go back to our app. Let's get the console up. Let's try and put in the credentials. So the credentials that we made were test3@test.com and hello world as the password. So let's click login, and nothing's happening. Okay, yeah. So here actually we have to subscribe to the observable. So let's go back to the auth service and let's make sure that we are returning this. Save that and then go back to the component class of the login page, and then here we can do .subscribe, get the response back, and here we can now get the response. And actually we don't need to console log in the auth service then, so let's go here and we don't actually need to do that. So let's just save that now and go back to our app, and let's actually try and press this. Okay, so we get a 400 bad request. That's actually good because it means it's sending the request. The reason that we're getting this error is because we didn't put in an email or password. So let's type that in now. Okay, let's click login. There we go. So we now get the console log with logged in, which is what we put in the auth service, and we get the HTTP response back here, and we get a status of 200 OK, great, and we get the body which has the user document as well, and the headers here. Let's see what the headers are. Okay, so let's actually go and see if the local storage is working. So let's go to application tab here, and let's go to local storage. So we get the user ID here, but we don't get the access token or the refresh token. That probably has something to do with the fact that we aren't getting the right headers here, because we should be getting the headers with the access token and the refresh token, but we're not getting that. So that looks like an issue on our API side, not on the front end. So right, okay, so the reason that this isn't working is because we have to set the access control expose headers property. Okay, so let's do that. And the way that we do that is just by going to our API here, and here what we can do is we can set that now, like that. So just type that in and save that, and hopefully it should now work. Let's go back to our app and let's reload the page and try again. test3@test.com. Okay, let's see. Okay, great. So we have these headers. So we now have all of the headers here. We have the refresh token and the access token here. Great. Let's see in more detail. Great, okay, so let's go to local storage and let's see if they're here. Great, okay. So here we can see that now these values are now being loaded and stored within local storage. Great, so now the login method completely works. Now what we have to do is we have to find a way to append the access token to each request we make, because we aren't able to access the protected resources without having the access token being in the header. So we will need to use HTTP interceptors to intercept each request and append the access token to the headers. So let's do that now. let's go back to our Angular application. There we go. So let's go to the terminal and let's generate a service. So generate service and call this web request interceptor. So let's go to the terminal and generate service, and let's call this web request interceptor, and press enter, and it's here now. It's here. Okay, great. And there's a few things we want to do. Let's actually rename this file to web-request.interceptor.ts, and there we go. And let's also rename this. Let's get rid of the service here. There we go. And now let's implement HTTP Interceptor. There we go. And now we have to create the main method, which is intercept. And that takes in the request. And that returns an observable. Alright then. Okay, so okay, so request is equal to this dot add auth header, and pass in the request. Okay, and now we want to create this method. So add auth header, which will get the request. So now what this would do is it will get the access token. Then it will append the access token to the request header. So let's create an accessor method for the access token. So let's go to the AuthService and let's create get access token. And this will return local storage dot get item, and then x access item is the key. There you go, save that. While we're here, we could also create the set access token. So let's do that. And this will just do local storage dot set item and access token. And then the value will be the access token that is passed in. There we go. We also have to get the refresh token as well. So let's do that as well. Okay, and let's go back to the interceptor. Let's get the access token now here. So token is equal to this dot, we first have to inject AuthService, so private AuthService okay, so token is equal to this dot AuthService dot get access token. There we go. And now we have to check if the token has a value. Then we will do return request.clone, and we'll pass in the updates to make, and then we'll say set headers, and then we'll set the x access token to token. There we go. Okay, and then at the end of this we can then return request. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now we can go back up to intercept and we can continue programming this. So now we can call next and handle the response. So now we can do return next.handle and pass in the request, and then do .pipe, and then here what we want to do is we want to pass in catch error, and we'll get the error. And then we can then do return throw error, and then error. Okay, there we go. And before that, we will then look at the error and see what's wrong. So for now, we can just console log the error, but we will be using this area here to put some code to update the access token soon. So save this now and let's see if it works. So let's close this. And let's actually delete this file here. We don't need it, so let's delete that. Okay, so let's save this now, and what we actually want to do now is go to the API, and we want to restrict access to the protected routes, which is pretty much everything. Only allow access to callers who have the correct access token. So let's implement that now.